Hello and welcome to the Minds on the Frontline Podcast, brought to you by the Frontline Strong Together 5 Program. FST5 provides streamlined access to behavioral and mental health services, as well as crisis resources for Michigan's Frontline 5 workers and their families. This includes all professional, part-time, and volunteer firefighters, EMS, law enforcement, corrections officers, and 911 dispatchers in Michigan and their immediate family members. First responders and mental health experts collaboratively created FST5 to provide 24/7 live support, effective resources, and cutting-edge services to prevent and alleviate PTSD, anxiety, depression, and other frontline work-related mental and behavioral health challenges. Need help now? If you are a frontline worker in Michigan or an immediate family member experiencing any crisis, work-related, substance abuse, depression, relationships, finances, or any other, reach out by calling 1-833-34-STRONG or go to fst5.org for more information. I'm Jeff Lassers, one of the hosts of the Minds on the Frontline podcast, and I am a professional firefighter, paramedic, educator, and content creator. Minds on the Frontline is co-hosted by Mike Mattern, a professional firefighter and paramedic and a peer support team member for his fire department and the FST5 program. Mike is a board member for the Michigan Crisis Response Association and has extensive experience in frontline worker mental and behavioral health. Also co-hosting with us today is Scott Taylor, a recently retired police officer from the city of Warren and a lead peer with the FST5 program. Scott serves as the president of the Michigan Fraternal Order of Police, or FOP, Lodge Number 124, and is the Michigan Officer Wellness Liaison for the National FOP, where he works to improve mental health support and wellness resources for law enforcement officers. Together, we aim to inform, educate, and entertain frontline workers, their families, and the public about the realities of mental and behavioral health challenges faced by those on the front lines. In this episode, we welcome back Dr. Ali Amirsadri, a respected psychiatrist and mental health advocate who has dedicated over 20 years of his career to emergency psychiatry in the ER. Known affectionately as Dr. A, he is currently a professor and associate chair for clinical services for the Department of Psychiatry at Wayne State University and serves as the chief medical officer for the Wayne Health Department of Psychiatry. Dr. A has returned to continue our critical conversation on grief, mourning, and trauma, building on the insights we explored in episode 41. As the director of the FST5 program, Dr. A has been instrumental in developing strategies to address the unique stressors and trauma faced by Michigan's frontline workers. His work focuses on preventing and treating PTSD, anxiety, depression, and alcohol-related issues. Dr. A's extensive experience in both emergency and general psychiatry enables him to provide a profound understanding of the psychological and physiological impacts of grief and loss. During this episode, we revisit the concept of multidimensional grief, examining how past experiences, cultural influences, and biological factors shape our responses to loss. Dr. A will also share actionable strategies for navigating grief while fostering growth, understanding trauma's overlap with grief, and supporting first responders and their family in their healing journey. As always, we aim to provide meaningful conversations that inform, educate, and inspire those on the front lines and their families. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and make sure to like and subscribe to all Minds on the Frontline Podcast social media channels. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How is everyone?
Good. How are you?
Very well.
How are you guys?
Outstanding.
Fantastic. All right.
Another December morning in the city of Detroit, Michigan. Our lovely Lions are still doing well.
Go Lions.
And here we are.
Go Lions, man. Excellent.
So one of the things we usually talk about with the Lions is grief. But we don't have to this year.
Many years of grief. Many years.
Many years.
Decades.
Decades, really, right?
Yes.
So now, but we are talking about a bit more of traumatic grief and grief in general and mourning. We already had a discussion with you, Dr. A, previously about this, and there's really so much to say about it that you wanted to sit back down and continue the conversation. Let's start by revisiting the fact that you talked about multidimensional grief. We talked about that a lot in the last one, but I think it's a great place to pick up from. So go ahead and tell everybody what that is and how it kind of applies to this conversation.
Yeah. Well, the way that I look at it is that we can focus on two different areas. One is looking at grief in a spectrum, and that spectrum is connection that grief creates from the past to the present and future. The history has created a kind of web around us in general. We didn't have any control over what happened in the previous generations. We didn't have any control over what happened during pregnancy and during our childhood. However, what has been made all along has been passed on to us. So we all have inherited things which we have no idea where they come from and why they are there and why I'm responding different way than you are. So that one aspect of it, and goes to the traumas that past generations went through and the way that their biology changed. The traumas that the mother went through and what she had to cope with, those will reflect it on the brain of this child as was in womb. That creates some networks which probably in you and I and Mike and others are different. And finally, after birth again, all the difficulties that the family went through and the way that the mother reacted, the father reacted, and others will have major impact on how I respond to future events. So putting all these together, the coping styles or strategies that child has developed were under the circumstances of helplessness, neediness, vulnerability, and uncertainty. Those coping styles are good for that time because the child wants to protect himself or herself. But when I'm in my 20s, 30s, 40s, 60s, they are not going to be efficient. And that's why many times we react the way that we do, which are not the best and the healthiest. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of or dimension of it is the model, which in general we call biopsychosocial and spiritual model. So there are biological changes which I touched upon as we are discussing. Then there are social or cultural parts of it, which in every culture people react differently, or the reactions are very dependent on how I learned to express myself. And the psychological part is that, as we discuss more, I can explain better. However, depending on what I witnessed during my childhood, I may have a more safe base in me or a very insecure, uncertain base for me. And based on that insecurity that I have inside, then I will react differently. So this is basically the dimensions that I was talking about.
So it's not just the sum of all of your experiences. It's literally like the programming, not only in vitro, but everything to birth, everything after, and then the environmental impact, not just my family.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of variables which represent the multidimensional factor of how you as a human is going to respond under any stress, let alone crisis.
Absolutely.
Grief.
And multi-generational,
right.
Again. So this is a complicated issue. It's not, we talk about grief sometimes very simply, and it's not that way. It is part of life. In fact, life without grief will be very different. The purpose of grief, in fact, is to help you let go of certain things and grow with and within it. We need to learn how to live in parallel with the grief part rather than dismissing it. Grief is going to be with us.
So we're just talking, and you talked about how it can be multi-generational, it could be in vitro, even from childhood, and there's that spectrum. How is it that your upbringing or the culture that you grow up in, how does that shape the way you grieve?
Yes. In general, human beings learn from watching and mimicking. So if I'm in a culture which is not as expressive, for example, in general Asian culture, you may not know what's going on inside me. And you won't learn to express yourself the way that in the United States we do, or in India people do, etc. At the same time, religious customs and rituals shape many of expressions that we have, because grief is, we need to understand it, grief is a holy thing, and we need to honor and respect it. So whenever this happens, the culture or the spiritual customs that people have will play a major role in how we express ourselves, where we express ourselves, and how. So these are all issues which we need to, again, respect and honor, because that's how we express ourselves.
How do we respect and honor them? Do we just recognizing them?
Well, it starts from me, myself. And secondly, it will be the people who are around me, not to expect that I react such a way. I react the way that I know how to react. There is no way which is better than the other. The issue is how I cope with it and how I progress and move on with my life. Memories are going to be there. Someone said something very important. I have been thinking about it. Past is never gone. Past is alive. The issue is that how I can live with it and what areas of past I focus on. So we can't dismiss it. We cannot, and we should not forget. But we have to live with it. We have to come to grips that this is how I'm going to live from now on.
Without avoiding it.
Without avoiding, absolutely, yes.
Kind of clicked with me even just now. It's like, I think about in my family how each side of the family grieves differently. So one side of my family is heavily Irish, right? So what we do is we celebrate the life. If somebody passes away,
Irish Wake,
right?
Yeah, we actually,
great party.
Actually,
That's
no, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
we actually have a
absolutely.
party. Like
It's a celebration of who the person was.
Yes,
It
like,
will always be, is I think the point you're making too.
yes, and you really, my grandma passed away. We went and had a party that night and celebrated her life. Those types of things. But I look at maybe the other side of my family. It's the more traditional, where you grieve and you go to the funeral home. And
the somber process.
Yes,
that
the somber
the
process.
expectation of somber almost.
But it makes a lot of sense, like you're talking about. Those are all learned behaviors.
Yeah.
That's how the family.
Absolutely.
So, like,
Right,
I
when
know,
Drew was there, he learned that's how we celebrate life on this side of the family.
Yes.
That's our custom.
Yes. I know through that, I've picked up that's how I grieve I'm mostly like, I celebrate the life of the person.
Yeah, certainly more fun.
Well, no, I think
No, you're looking at all the positive stuff. I don't say it's a party,
absolutely.
but you're
Yes.
you're forcing yourself to go, man, that person was amazing. We were
they
so lucky.
They lived a life.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
It certainly brought you together.
Yes,
It
so
probably stimulated more conversation, I'm guessing. All of the
course.
things that allow the grieving process to have, like you're saying, it doesn't have to be sad. This group figured out how to do it in a positive aspect,
Yeah,
whereas other groups literally pour themselves into the emotional side.
Yes.
correct. But at the same time, they may cause some grief or discomfort from the other end. And these are based on the understanding that we have from the other culture. And that's when we have to respect and honor it.
And that's the problem. I think myself, my one side is Eastern European, the other side is down south. So when they grieve different, you see one side of it, oh my God, they don't even care about that person.
Right.
They're very judgmental.
Yes.
Very judgmental, and there's everybody's grieving in just different ways, right?
Different ways.
Yes. Yes.
It reminded me something which came to my mind. The degree of grief that people show has nothing to do with the amount of love and closeness that they had towards the other person. Sometimes people will express themselves as such that we think that they are just going to die right now because they were so close and they lost. And this is not true. And probably someone is dying on the inside but is saying nothing. So don't pay attention to these kind of quote-unquote displays.
Dr. Ray, you've previously discussed the physiological impacts of grief. Could you explain more about the physical symptoms such as appetite changes or even heartache and why they occur?
That's a good question, Scott. The issue is that if you look at it, grief as it starts is a stress, significant stress. So all the symptoms of stress are going to be manifesting in you.
Right.
That comes from sleep to appetite to energy to negative thinking and all the other things.
Right.
What is important is that we know these mechanisms. Number one is that we talked about the stress hormones and cortisol and that. Number two was the oxytocin that we talked about and the bonding relationship. However, there's a catch in here. That oxytocin, which causes you and I bond or people get in love, needs to have a receptive agent. In other words, if you and I are close and then we are talking, we are releasing oxytocin. But if I come very close to you and we don't know each other, that the same oxytocin is going to be working as an aggravating agent and wants me to repel from you or get into fight with you. So we need to, that's why I said we need to respect the culture, because from one culture, closeness is very important, and from another culture, you have to have the distance. And that's something that we are just working on the biology or physiology of the individual, as I have learned. So that's one part of it. The second part is that there is a place in our brain, which, in fact, Mike and I, in one of the seminars we had, we made joke of, and it is hippocampus or hippo. You mentioned hippo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That part is the memory part of the brain, one of the main memory parts of our brain. That small part of our brain has specialized cells. What do? If you go to the house, let's assume, and then you put your toaster in a part of the kitchen that when you wake up, you want to go to the toaster, put some toast in it, and the next morning you wake up, the toaster is not there. Your reaction is going to be what? Irritation. What happened? And
I just woke up.
Where's my toaster?
My breakfast?
Right.
So what happens is that these types of special cells are going to start firing. Where do they fire to? To your main fear and threat center, which is where? Amygdala, that you guys know more. So even with those small changes, the brain reacts. Now imagine that you lost someone and you're going by the bedroom and that person is not there anymore. Imagine the enormity of the stress which happens, and you are not aware of it, but you react that way. You pass by the restaurant that you used to go to,
Right.
and now it's not there, but something happens and you just all of a sudden get angry or depressed or some other feel, and you don't know why, but it just comes over you. So these are the functions of those specialized cells. It is not that you are weak or you haven't worked on your grief. You have worked on your grief. These are the physiology that this body has dedicated itself to us to survive and live better. So that's one part of it. The other part is that there is a network in the brain which is called DMN.
And I believe that's default mode network, correct?
DMN, yes, default mode network. So what happens is that has different functions. One of them is that it will give me the chance to self-reflect, to see what happened in my life and learn. At the same time, it also gives me self-doubt. I should have done this. I shouldn't have done this.
Right.
The other part which it will do also is to make disparaging comments to myself, make me feel guilty, make me feel ashamed of what I should have done, not have done. And finally, there is a piece which without knowing, I'm comparing myself, my reactions to Scott's reactions. And that makes me, again, feel differently. So these different biological aspects are as such are controlling me. So what is my role in here? Is to understand it, respect it, work on it. And that's part of the grief that I talk about, is that we understand where my reactions come from, I will be able to work on it better.
Everything that you just talked about is everything that happens after a traumatic run. When we go in and talk to these first responders, it's everything that you just talked about. The specialized cells that remember where things
Exactly. Fantastic.
So where that corner where you had a fatal accident, every time you go by that corner, the specialized cells, right? The second part where I should have done something differently, or I feel, guilty.
Yeah.
That's kicking in as well, because what do we all do after those runs?
Right.
Yeah.
we start thinking about, okay, what could I have done differently?
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
And then the last part where you're like, I'm comparing yourself, that's when we come in and do the diffusings, and you're sitting there. Not only are you at questioning yourself, what could I have done different, but now you're looking around the room to see what everybody else is doing. Because you don't want to, you know how you want to react.
Because that's our culture. And you're
Because
looking
that's
for
our
that
culture.
cultural cue. Yeah.
I mean, just sitting here, I'm just thinking about all, as he's explaining, you know what I'm saying?
Weird how he understands how that's going to happen.
No, but I think it helps. I think it helps if the people who are listening right now, all of us who have gone through that traumatic call or whatever, or now moving forward, you can understand why you're feeling the way you're feeling and why things are happening.
You can handle a call or a run perfect, right? Picture perfect.
Yep.
It's the way, and then maybe I should have, even though you did everything properly.
The gut feel.
That gut feeling.
Like, should I have done that? Yeah.
And you want somebody to give you the reassurance of, man, you did a great job. Not, hey, that was okay.
No, I think
we'll get him next time.
Yeah, we'll get him next time.
No, that's not the way we're going.
A lot of times when we come in and do those diffusings, debriefings, it's just that. When they're talking to us, telling us what they did, and you're thinking in your head, you're like, you ran that thing perfectly.
Spot on.
There's nothing more you could have done.
Yeah.
Just telling them that from someone who knows what's going on, you can almost see a change.
Absolutely.
In them, because they're like, okay, I know I didn't do something wrong. This person wasn't there. They heard what we did.
Self-doubt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You removed it from an outside perspective to analyze it as a professional that they trust and say, did I do the right thing? Like, you nailed it, dude, but this is just how life goes sometimes.
But I think it helps eliminate that.
Yeah, it's a relief.
Guilt
I'm looking for you to look at this and give me an honest
Yes.
opinion and help me see that.
Yes, exactly.
That's amazing.
And understand that this is part of your life. This is how it is. You can't change it. The issue is that how you're going to learn from it. But something else came to my mind since you mentioned, Mike, and that is there is a difference between grief and trauma. Trauma is as such that is unprocessed memories that is very intrusive and devastating. However, the biological reactions are the same as you mentioned. So that's very important. And the other part is almost like most of the time, or probably almost all the time, there is no grief, but some degree of trauma. They are very interconnected together. And imagine that this happens during your childhood and how it's going to shape you. And no one is there to help you understand what's going on inside you. Or you can't. You don't have the capacity to understand it at that age.
You can't even understand it, let alone express it to somebody and even ask for help.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Now, we're talking adults here. When we start talking about children, what are some unique ways it'll manifest within the children, and how is it the best way as adults we can support those kids, even our own kids, in these times?
We need to look at the life of a child. As I mentioned, the child is helpless and dependent. So when these changes happen, they are horrified. They are very fearful and they are very insecure on the inside, and they can't express themselves depending on their age that they are at. So there are kids who understand all the things which happens, but they don't have the vocabulary to express it. The only way is that we have to be with them, make them feel secure. And the other way is through arts, music, painting, drawing, going to the parks, playing. That's how the child will express. However, as this child grows up, all these sadnesses and insecurities are going to be there. But there is a bigger child, an adolescent in the background, who's angry because was not able to express himself or herself. And that anger comes in order to protect that child who was not able to express himself. So all these are inside us. That's why many times you can see these younger adults becoming angry and not able to control themselves and all that, out of the proportion that you can never imagine. They have unresolved grief inside, many of them. So we have to be very careful about what needs to happen. What do I do with the child? Be with the child, roll with the child, protect the child, have others play with them, and let them talk if they want to talk. They don't want to talk, they don't want to talk. If necessary, therapy is going to be very helpful.
To guide the talking.
Yes.
Right. So if they're not, quote, doing well, or impacted in a negative way and they can't express themselves, and you are finding yourself doing all the, quote, right things, oof, this kid might need a higher level of care,
Yes.
like therapy, and there's some great child
But they
psychologists
will
out there.
show themselves in not being able to sleep, being
Right.
clingy,
Right.
or distancing themselves and withdrawing from you. They may start acting out in the school.
Sounds like a firefighter.
Yeah.
All the things.
You said that, not me.
I know,
just wanna-
it does.
Put that on the record. I didn't say it.
I've seen this manifest in man children.
No,
They would regress. That they may bedwet, some of them. They may not eat, or they start eating a lot. They may skip out classes when they are in preteen and teenagers. And some, unfortunately, will run to drugs and alcohol at very early ages. These are all expressions of grief that we don't know what to do with it.
now, depending on the age of the child, is it good to have them, do things like journaling, or if they can't talk about it, at least off gas it a little bit, or if they're younger, maybe draw pictures, things like that.
Absolutely. Drawing pictures and painting and all those comes before than journaling. But journaling is perfect as long as the child is not forced to journal.
Mm-hmm.
Writing is a skill. If the child likes it, that's great. But we can't force them to do so.
It's almost like they can journal with the picture.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
That's exactly
Yeah.
what it is.
Once in a while, hey, how was your day at school? And I'll get they just got out of school, right? They don't want to
I
talk
don't
about
want to
sports,
talk
but they just
about.
got out of school.
Oh, it was all right. What'd you do?
But
Nothing.
I'm like, ooh, draw me a picture on what you did at recess today. I'll get the story and then
Yeah.
this person did this and that, and so I can see that being beneficial, and that's in a good time.
Yeah.
But I can also see it if she just wanted to talk, and we were coloring together, and we inspired that to kind of draw out some of the things that are kind of milling around in their heads.
Hanging out with friends. Don't forget the power of play.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Taking
So-
outside.
Did you notice the parallel you drew between a 10-year-old that just got home from school? How was school? Fine. What'd you do?
Right.
Nothing.
Same thing.
It's the same thing that when a first responder
Yes.
goes home to their spouse. How was your day? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing.
Yeah.
It's a long day. I don't want to talk about
Exactly.
it.
old-
The
same
parallel
old
is
stuff.
right there. It's right there.
But
Yes.
that is called regression.
Well, we are pretty much all children.
Yes.
A lot of grown-up kids working in our frontline agencies that need a lot of this, self-included.
Yeah, you get three of the world's fattest 12-year-olds sitting here.
you can see how painful it is to talk about emotions.
Yes.
Yes.
So you can see how much of difficulty the child has.
Absolutely.
And they don't have the
Yep.
coping capacity.
Don't.
Like we can joke, we can do things. We can. Hey, you want to go for a nice long hard walk or a whatever?
Right.
They're just like
They
don't
don't.
know
They
what to
haven't
do.
learned it yet. They haven't learned
Right.
those.
well, they're
coping, you know
not
what I mean?
developed
Like,
enough that right, exactly. They don't know what to do.
Uncle Scott hasn't taught them.
There is one other thing which came to my mind. In fact, genders, they grieve differently. And for guys, do something together, do some functions, go to a theater. Women is this is generalization, of course.
Sure.
But they can talk over lunch or dinner or watch something on TV. They want more private. Guys are action oriented. So that's something that we need to understand. If I'm accessing my grief through going to a ball game, maybe the woman doesn't want to do that. It's not hers.
Yeah.
And they want to sit with a friend and
Yeah, being in
talk.
public might
Yeah.
not ring true
Right,
for
right.
some people.
So that's something we need to understand as well.
Yeah, and it kind of just goes back to just respecting how that person grieves, right? It seems to all be coming back to that and that process.
Yeah, I think the moral of the story, if someone's grieving, just give them some space, or
They'll let you know.
them. Yeah, let them have a bad day.
They will let
It's
you know.
okay
what
to have a
they-
bad
yeah.
day.
Right.
Right.
So some days are worse than others. So let's get into things like suicide, trauma, some significant acute grief, and how these things challenge, interact, somebody that's been, and help those that have been affected.
The issue with very acute grief is the shock that people go under, and that shock is a significant stress reaction. The brain is confused, doesn't know what to do with what happened. In fact, doesn't want to understand what happened, and most people or many people will deny what happened. I gave you my own example. When I was about 10 and I lost my grandfather and went and yelled at him and all that. But at the same time, I said that I took some cigarette butts from him to keep in myself, so keep part of him with me all the time. But at the same time, I had this magical thinking that he may wake up and start smoking, right? So I wanted him not to have access to those cigarette butts. So there are so many different ways that stages of grief can display themselves. However, with this acute trauma that you really did not expect, or probably you expected but you didn't want to believe in it, has happened, it is that other people who are around need to stay around and not to feel weird that, oh, I don't know what to say.
Don't feel awkward.
Right.
Sit in it.
Sit in it and be with the individual. Don't ask about why it happened. Ask about how did you guys got to know each other. Let them talk about positives. Let them talk about whatever they want to talk. Don't focus on the last times. Did you expect this happen? All that, no. Expect that, oh, how did he like to do in general, etc. So this is how we have to work on it. What Mike said about trauma and grief, that's how they match in there. And you have to not only work on the grief part, but also on the traumatic event which happened.
Right. And it's hard to consolidate those two when I'm trying to remember the good things and trying to live with the fact that they made that choice.
Yes. But there's another thing which, in fact, is interesting, and that has been interesting for me. I have talked with first responders, and one of the things is that the culture was that we deny, we don't react, and we move on, which doesn't happen that way. But the guy who has joined and is in his 20s will learn from you. So we learn this culture from you. However, as I have been thinking more about it, the way that people have reacted for many, many years is unhealthy. Why? Because they themselves didn't know what to do or what to react. And that was a response to their own upbringing, that you couldn't express themselves. So may have been the result of unresolved grief that they had and then became part of the culture for firefighters, for police officers, etc.
Couldn't it also be the fact of your environment? So as a 20-year-old kid comes into a fire department or a police department, and he's watching all these, the old timers who, where there's no crying in baseball. We're not sad. We don't do that. And you're almost expected to do that. That's how this tradition carries on for years and years and years.
Of course. Yeah. But when you look back again, the guys who are the hardest people to break probably are the ones who have had unresolved grief from childhood. No one could help them.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think some of them reveal that through stories. Yep. There's a weird thing that happens. Yeah, when I was a kid, this happened. And you get this weird, if you really break down what that guy just said, that's abuse. And then you realize this is somebody who can just walk through stuff that, I didn't like that.
Well, there was a fire station we visited somewhere up north, and we were talking, and one of the guys said, these things never happen in here. We are fine. We deal with this. And then as he spoke, said, I'm in my fourth marriage right now. And nothing is happening.
Yeah.
So the level of denial that he had was so significant that he had gone through 4 times pain of
and he thinks
divorce.
It's them every time, I'm sure.
Right.
There's a common denominator in this equation, sir.
So from your perspective, are there any aspects of grief that we didn't cover in the first episode?
The aspect of the grief that I discussed, I guess, right now is the issue of respect and being part of our lives and learning to live with it. That's what I think we didn't cover as much. And I want us to understand that grief will help us grow. Grief is something which is part of us. And it's like a river. It will take you different places. Some days and seasons it's colder. Some days are warmer. You go to places which is more sandy and other places which are vegetative and all that. So grief is as such. You go to different places and segments of it. Respect it. Mm-hmm. Feel it. Think about it. And grow with it. So that's the part what I think it's very important for us to understand.
So, Dr. Ray, we've talked a lot about, recognizing the grief. What role do support systems play in helping that grief, and what can you do if you're in that support system role to help someone through that grief?
I'm glad you mentioned the word support system. We all need support systems. We come to a support system, and hopefully we'll go within that support system as they are around us. The issue of support system is that we need to be understanding. Let the person express himself or herself the way that they want to. Don't focus on the negatives. Focus on the positives. They want to talk? Talk. They don't want to talk? Don't talk. Just be there. Understand that the issues in the beginning, the issues of sleep and appetite, energy, those are there. But it doesn't mean that they have to stay there. The moment that you feel like the individual is not moving on, is stuck in somewhere, and then they talk about joining the person, etc., that's the time that need professional help. That grief has changed to depression at that point. Work that we have to do with the grieving people, particularly you guys, is so important that when the person realizes that someone cares, things changes. This is how the brain wants to be understood and be cared by someone else or cared for. However, the issue comes that the peer supports hear so many of these from others. What do we need to do with them and for them? And that is something that I know you guys are working on, that we need to learn to talk to each other as well and process the information. No one has died from crying. It is not crying that kills people. It is not crying. So that's what we need to do. And the other part of it is that getting involved in activities are going to be helpful. Why? Because the cortisol, what we talked about, increases glucose, sugar, in our body. Why? Because it wants to defend against something or wants to fight with something. Well, grief is as such that I can't find someone to fight or run away from. So I get engaged in physical activity. Go to the nature with them. Do things with them. If they need help, which everybody does, help them organize things. But don't tell them what to do. Be there and be a help in there. Be a hand in there rather than director. Let them direct. Let them have the confidence back. Remember, if someone is in a relationship and they lose the other party, their life changes significantly. Yesterday they were couples. Starting today, they are singles. So the networks, the social networks that they were in, it's going to change. We need to understand and respect it. Many of them will feel like the third wheel from then on. So the life has changed significantly, and we need to work on that as well. The life and the responsibilities that were shared in the past have changed. We also need to understand and help them with whatever necessary. A breadwinner is gone possibly. A caretaker is gone possibly. We need to understand what needs to happen with those areas. Many people may not have access or may not know about what type of even insurance or life insurance the person had. Those are things that we really need to work on and help these individuals. They cannot navigate it on their own. So again, be available. And there are other things. I discovered a website which is called grief.com. It has a lot of information in it, and I encourage people to review it. It is not very in-depth, but it touches on many areas which are going to be helpful for people. And it has videos, and I think it has some podcasts as well. It's very good. You don't need membership for it, or it doesn't cost you anything. Just go and visit it. It's a good website.
I think there's also some really good resources on a website you helped curate as well. FST5.org.
Yeah.
But grief.com sounds great. I think everybody should check out
Yeah.
the resource on ours as well. And I learned a lot in this next chapter about grief
Yeah.
and that process. And I think we start pulling on trauma a little bit more, maybe in another sit down with you.
This was a good episode. Even from sitting here and listening, it made a lot of connections.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in
Why-
therapy when we do this with
Of why,
Doc.
of why things happen and how things all
Yeah.
are intertwined and work together and why we have these things.
Yeah.
And it helps from a peer support
Yeah.
arena because now I can understand more why things are happening.
Yeah, for you
know what I'm saying?
specifically,
Like-
being able to walk into the room with this information, I think anybody listening who's a peer support member, this is really good information to have in your mind that's really going to better help you people, because I think the big message here is just understanding what that person needs or doesn't need in a very simple way, and being present is so powerful.
Yeah.
Yes.
And not judgmental.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But my purpose, in fact, since we are talking, is for our peers who are working on these, take pieces of what I have talked about and add it to their experiences and their own readings that they have. So when they present things, it will be a little bit more natural and makes more sense. I want to take, to be honest, the issue of quote-unquote psychological thing out of this equation. This is your body, which is reacting. This is not you. It's your body. So respect your body, listen to it, work with it.
No, absolutely.
That's my message.
Absolutely. And it wasn't until just listening to him talk today, that it all came together. You know what I mean? Because that is a quote unquote normal reaction when we go in and talk to people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Common reaction.
A common
Yeah.
reaction. And now it makes sense why it's a common reaction. It's biological.
And you can validate the
Physiological.
people that they're not weird or in a bad spot.
Yes.
It is expected to feel this. We want you to.
We want
Yes.
to,
Don't avoid it.
Don't
Yes.
avoid it.
Be in it
The other
with support.
the other thing that you mentioned that I'm so glad that you mentioned it was no one ever died from crying.
Yeah, that's a great
Right?
line.
Yeah.
And
What a good line.
And
Right.
and one of the things that how we try to explain it to people is it's stored potential energy.
yeah.
So if you don't cry, that energy is still sitting in there.
Got to go somewhere.
They have died without expressing the energy.
Well,
so you got
and
a
that's
point
the thing
there.
is, and,
yeah.
what we explain to them is that energy is going to come out, right?
Yeah.
It's going to come out either in a good path. I'm going to
Yep.
cry. I'm going to grieve. I'm going to do my stuff, or that potential energy is going to come out like you talked about, and it could kill
It ain't
you.
going to be good.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's where
Yep.
the bad coping mechanisms start coming in.
Do you know that crying also increases oxytocin in you? But at the same time, particularly women, when they are angry, they cry. Well, anger happens when you are in touch with someone else. So you're experiencing. And possibly that person is a male figure. Crying decreases testosterone quite a bit. So it calms down the guy as well.
All right. Now-
We are affected by our environment.
Yes, 100%.
Right.
And I have 2 daughters and a wife and no son. So this will be interesting. in a couple of years.
Same here.
You get it, my man. But we get more love than anybody. Well, Dr. A, it was absolutely great to have you here.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you again. We're going to have you back
Yes,
for
thank
some
you.
more.
It
Absolutely.
was
Scott.
awesome.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
At your expense.
Yes, usually.
Thank you for listening to the Minds on the Frontline podcast. We have more great content coming out soon. Please check us out on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and make sure to like and subscribe to all Minds on the Frontline podcast social media channels. Thank you, and have a great day.